grassroots energy can be really powerful and effective, but I think it's most effective when it's joined up with top-down support and advocacy. And that's where you need senior people to also be projecting the same message downwards and the grassroots energy projecting that message upwards. And hopefully the two will meet in the middle. I think that's when you get really effective culture change or sectoral change. In terms of people wanting to join in with something that aligns with their personal interests and values, whether it be Hidden Ref, whether it be UKRN, I think one of the advantages now is that all of the social media tools and other tools that we have available makes it much easier for people to connect. If you're interested in open research, reproducibility, research rigor, then UKRN exists and can put you in touch with either your existing local network or give you the resources to set up your own local network. Similarly, Hidden Ref, there are communities that you can be plugged into. You just need to reach out.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to What the Ref, our attempt to demystify everybody's favourite research assessment framework. I'm Gemma.
I'm James.
And I'm Simon.
And today we're asking what the ref happened since our last podcast.
Well, not very much, actually, I feel. So I've been sort of scanning around looking for things that are happening. On the ref website in June, they announced the people who are deputy chairs of panels who weren't announced previously, but that doesn't feel very exciting.
Except for the people who got the deputy chair position. Congratulations.
Well,
round of applause. Yay.
So well done to them. There was a couple of interesting articles in Times Higher. There was one about using generative AI for putting together your ref submissions. I'm not entirely sure where I stand on this. I think generative AI's got this sort of wonderful ability to produce reams of text for you, but whether that text is really fit for purpose, I don't know. What do you think about using generative AIs for your submissions?
Well, I think, Simon, your attempt at making a song lyrics about the ref was quite successful when we tried it a couple of months ago. That was quite interesting, but I'm not really quite where I saw it. I think that should be perhaps a topic for another podcast in the future. Let's get Richard Watermeyer on to see what he says about his project with Research England.
Yes, yeah, that sounds exciting. I think we obviously this month we got our first guest. I'll be introducing later on. So I think we need more guests on this podcast. So definitely, let's get Richard along.
I mean, I can see the logic, I guess, of using it like technology like that to think about what are the sort of themes that might come out of large amounts of paperwork. But I would hope we're not going to find that our PCE statements are written by Claude. That would be bad.
Yeah, but how different is it as is a PCE statement written by Claude or ChatGPT than a PCE statement that is heavily dependent on indicators and indicators only to make its case? What is the difference there?
I don't know. I don't think I ever want to enter that debate. I'm more interested in the debate around. So obviously there have been a lot of talk of using generative AI for assessment, not in the ref, but with papers and things, and that's obviously frowned upon somewhat. So I'm very interested in the way that the generative AI is going to be used around the ref submission and around assessment in general, because I think that's going to happen whether we sanction it or not.
Well, I'm presuming, given that UKRI have said that peer reviewers for grants cannot use Gen AI to review them, they're going to tell the ref panelists they definitely cannot as well.
Yeah.
Also, on what's been happening since our last podcast, well, the Hidden Ref Festival has been announced fully. You can now sign up. It's 7th of 8th of October at the Think Tank in Birmingham. You can go to Hidden Ref website, find the sign up. It's all free. There might even be a dinner if you want to stay for a night and have dinner with us as well. So, yeah.
Can I also just say, I think that the Think Tank in Birmingham is an amazing spot to have it. For those people who haven't been there, it's actually part of a science museum, which I think is quite apt for the Hidden Ref and its principles. So that's going to be exciting. I am on call to explain the Bernoulli effect to anybody who ever wants it. So there you go.
That's the first time I've heard the word Bernoulli since I learned about it in physics. So could you tell us a bit more about the festival, James? What have we got planned?
It's set across 2 days. So first day is going to be very kind of practical, work in the community, thinking about what indicators and kind of assessment methodologies might look like for non-traditionally submitted outputs, since that's now the official way in which I do it with scare quotes. And that's obviously not good if you're not watching the YouTube video, but come back to the YouTube if you're on your podcast. And then, second day will be much more talks. Lightning talks, I think, are going to be a big feature. We've opened up lightning talks from the community to come in and tell us things they think we should know about kind of hidden roles and non-traditional outputs and all that kind of stuff. And we've had a huge response already, which kind of shocked Lindsay and I when we were looking at the amount of people who've said they intend to put one in at the moment. So lightning talks. And then there'll be some talks from, probably not a kind of keynote session, probably more like a sort of a plenary panel session where we've got some invited speakers, names of which will be announced relatively soon. And of course, I shouldn't forget, previous winners of Hidden Ref competition will also be represented there, giving talks about their work and what the competition has meant for them.
So there's another group I want to get onto this podcast. I want to talk to some of the winners and talk about how they've used the Hidden Ref competition in their lives. Because obviously we've seen some really great case studies of people using it for promotion and for getting funding. So let's get some people on to talk about that. So we had the first ever interviewee on the podcast. We had Marcus Munafò, who's the Deputy Vice-Chancellor at the University of Bath and also the Provost. And we were talking about his work with the REF, some of the work he's done around the UK Reproducibility Network, and his sort of plans for the University of Bath as well. So let's have a listen to that and then come back for a bit of a discussion. Thanks for joining us, Marcus.
Thanks for having me.
So I thought we'd start off with one of the questions we want to ask all of our guests, and that is, what's the role of the REF and what's been your experience of the REF?
So I think that's a good question to ask, because I think over the years, REF has had more and more responsibilities loaded onto it. And it's worth perhaps stepping back and thinking, actually, really, what should it be for? What do we want it to be for? And progress from there. So I think fundamentally, I see REF as an exercise in accountability, in ensuring that the public money that goes into the higher education sector is allocated appropriately in order to achieve what that allocation of money is intended to achieve. And through that, ensuring that universities are performing at the level that we might want them to, expect them to. So that, I think, is fundamentally what it's about. But it has also become, I think in a positive way, something that has the potential, at least, to shape the sector in terms of incentive structures, in terms of culture, and so on. Now, I say potentially because there's also a risk of unintended consequences in terms of what REF incentivizes and therefore what incentives it creates within the sector more generally. So that's something that I think we need to keep an eye on, and that is ever evolving, because of course the sector adapts to the REF as it changes when it tries to incentivize certain things. So the whole system is dynamic, and we're never going to get to the point where I think REF is perfect and does everything that we want it to do. It's going to be this constant process or cycle of evaluation and improvement.
So I think that's absolutely, I could not agree more with you on that front. So I think the thing that's really interesting for us, and actually I believe this will be the focus of the episode, is it's about the incentives that the REF provides and the way that higher education institutes will then reflect those incentives in their local policies. So do you see that happening at the University of Bath?
Well, I've only been at the University of Bath for 3 weeks, so it's a little bit early for me to tell, I guess. And of course, part of my job here is to ensure that we are positioning ourselves in a way that means that we do perform well in the REF and perform well generally. But I think that captures one of the challenges, which is that ultimately REF is zero sum. There's a finite pot, and we're all trying to compete for a larger slice of that pot. And I think that's where REF can become unhelpful, because it fosters that competitive approach, which is inherent in anything that's zero sum. So what I think institutions should be doing is thinking about how they can do the things that will ensure that they do well in the REF, but will also help them do well more generally. For example, can we create an environment or ways of working that help us do well in the REF, but also drive inward investment from industry, from local businesses, whatever it might be, so that what we're doing isn't simply in service of REF, is about ensuring that we're doing what we do well and driving inward investment, not just through what we get from REF, but more generally.
Yes, that's the REF as a sort of driver of research culture, research environment, that sort of area.
And also how we do research, the type of research that we do, everything that goes around that. But the point is that it's very easy, I think, to become focused on ref as an end in itself because it's such an important exercise. But I think there's an opportunity for institutions to think of it in more general terms and embed ref within wider efforts to be effective, efficient, modern universities that are working in service of society and doing a good job when it comes to research, but also education, innovation, all of the other things that we do.
So, as you've only been at Bath for 3 weeks, it feels a bit wrong to keep focusing on that area. But what I'm really interested in, actually, is your views as the director of the UK Reproducibility Network, because there's a connection in my mind with the incentive structures that we put in place and all of the other work we do. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the connection between research assessment and research reproducibility, which I know is really important to you.
Well, an analogy I often use, and anyone who's heard me talk will have heard this story before. So for those of you that have, check your emails for the next 2 minutes. But what I use as an analogy is the transformation of the automobile manufacturing industry in the 1970s, where the statistician W. Edwards Deming took the concept of quality control throughout the manufacturing process to the Japanese automobile industry and transformed that industry. And now all other manufacturers use a similar kind of approach. The insight was that if you focus on the process itself rather than the end product, then not only do you drive up quality, but you also drive up efficiency, productivity, because it's much easier to identify where the error has occurred. So if you have a badly built car and your quality control is all at the end of the process, working out what went wrong in your process is much more difficult because you have to reverse engineer from that badly built car and trace it back to where the error occurred in the process. Whereas if you have checks on the process itself, then when an error occurs at that stage, you can stop the process, correct it, and then restart the process. And as Deming said, if you get the process right, then you can trust the outputs, the results to look after themselves. Now, what does that mean in the context of academic research? At the moment, in many disciplines at least, the quality control that we have, the peer review, happens right at the end of the process where the whole thing is finished and written up as an article or a monograph or whatever it might be. And we don't have much in the way of formal quality control throughout the process. What UKRN is promoting is greater use of open research practices, in part because that transparency allows for more error detection, allows for more scrutiny, both external scrutiny where others can check our study designs, our plans, our data, our code, whatever it might be, and spot either errors or things that they might have done differently and challenge that in a way that's much more difficult when all you have to look at is the final output. And the fact that others can check through that transparency in that way also creates an internal incentive for us ourselves as individual researchers, research groups, institutions to embed processes that ensure the quality of what we're doing all the way through that process, that cycle.
So you say you're focusing on reproducibility because you want to improve research quality. Do you have any sort of evidence or case studies around that?
So I think one of the important things is that we need to be looking at whether or not what we do with the intention of improving how we work actually has that outcome, whether there are any unintended consequences. There's a growing interest in meta-research, meta-science, which I think is exactly how we can and should do that to evidence the impact of our interventions. In the context of open research, we as UKRN argue that open research can drive up quality, and we have reasons for arguing for that. There's not a huge amount of formal evidence around that at the moment, and we need to develop that evidence. But I can give an anecdotal example, which is that we've been publishing data and code in our research group, or what was my research group until I moved to Bath, for a few years. And we quite recently had an email from a student at the University of Glasgow who had downloaded one of our deposits, the data and the code, run the code on the data, and got a table that looked different to the one in the published manuscript. And she emailed me to say, I'm really sorry, can you explain this? And she was right. There was an error in our deposit. Fortunately, it was a minor error. It was an error in the data dictionary where one of the variables had been flipped. So the manuscript was actually correct, the data was correct, the code was correct, but there was this error in the data dictionary. And the point is, first of all, that transparency that was achieved by sharing our data and code and so on led to that kind of error detection that in principle we think could occur if you make your research as available as possible. But also it highlights that in any human endeavor, there's going to be human error. And researchers, however well trained they are, however hard they try, are going to make mistakes. And we've all read manuscripts that have been read by, or published articles, I should say, that have been read by multiple authors, reviewers, editors, proofreaders, copy editors, and they still have typos in them. Typos slip into work all the time, whether it's a data set, a data dictionary, a manuscript. And other small errors will just be part of any human activity. So rather than pretending that doesn't exist and pretending our work is pristine, and rather than coming down like a ton of bricks on anyone who makes an honest error, we should think, how can we create systems and processes that are optimized to catch as many of those errors as possible without tipping over into becoming overly onerous or bureaucratic? And I don't think we've thought enough about that. And I think that's something that, again, would benefit from that meta-research perspective of evaluating whether or not the interventions that we introduce actually do what we want them to do.
So I think this idea, personally, with the way that scrutiny is really on that end product, on the journal publication, and spreading some of that scrutiny across the other steps in the process is something that I've been fighting for a long time, specifically looking at software. And it wasn't until we really started to look at the reasons why that wasn't happening that we realized actually it wasn't just software, it was many of the other stages and many of the other outputs that are necessary to research that were also being overlooked. That kind of led us to the Hidden Ref and why we wanted to focus on broadening and increasing the diversity of the outputs that are submitted, because we thought if we can bring them in and have them valued, then the incentives will drive the researchers and the other research staff to sort of focus their time in ensuring that those outputs are key and are fit for purpose. So are there changes you would like to see to the ref that would allow that scrutiny over the entire research process? Is there stuff that the ref could do to help drive things in the right direction?
I think to a large extent, ref is doing this. They are, or Research England through the ref is promoting open research. Research England supports the UK Reproducibility Network and our open research programme, but it's also a very prominent part of the ref framework, beyond just open access publication, to include the sharing of all of those different intermediate outputs that constitute the research process. Whatever your discipline or epistemology happens to be, there's a version of that I think applies very broadly across disciplines. I think the emphasis on people, culture and environment is also part of that. The environment within which research takes place is necessarily upstream, causally speaking, of the research itself. If you get that environment right, again, that's similar to the Deming's analogy. If you get the environment right and create the right working conditions where people can do their best work, do high quality work, but also you have the processes and the teams and the professionals supporting all of that, then the work is going to be higher quality. And if the work is higher quality, then that's going to lead to impact, to societal benefit more rapidly. So I think a lot of these things are already happening. I think the emphasis on a greater diversity of research outputs and extending beyond REF slightly for a moment to things like the UKRI People and Teams Action Plan, the diversity of contributors to the research process. I think all of those are positive things that also, again, if we get right, are going to mean that academia is a more attractive proposition for investment from other sectors, because we'll be working in ways that are more modern, interoperable with those other sectors and so on. And we can bring not only the scholarship and the intellectual brand of the sector, but also modern working practices and research practices that make us good places to partner with if you're in the private sector.
So that's actually a fairly new part of thinking around the changes to practices for me. Actually, they're bringing in more of the private sector, and it's certainly something I've seen being discussed a lot more. I guess because of the financial health of the sector, we're sort of looking at other revenue streams. So certainly, the Times Higher Education this week has a piece from the VC at Aston talking about the importance of bringing in external funding from the private sector. Is that something you think you'll be looking at in the University of Bath?
Well, but I mean, Bath is a relatively young university and was founded on the basis of being at that interface of academia and industry, if you like. So that's always been an important part of how Bath has tried to work. I think it is important in the current financial climate exactly because the public funding available is finite and is not going to be growing anytime soon. Student fees, similarly, are increasing very slightly now, but certainly not keeping track with how much it costs to run a university. So we do need to be thinking more broadly about how we can drive inward investment. I think the challenge is that we need to do that in a way that means that we don't lose sight of what we are. We don't stop being universities. We need to have scholarship at our heart. We're in the business of generating knowledge through teaching, through research. We need to remain academia, but a version of academia that is modern, fit for purpose in the 21st century, and allows us to do all of the things that we have historically done well, but in a way that also allows us to engage with society more generally and be fit for purpose.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think keeping the generation of knowledge right at the heart of our industry, regardless of the other changes that might be necessary, is absolutely key to our success. So we talked a bit about the focus on the end product of research, the journal publications, the books. And you'll have seen, I hope, that our focus on trying to get people to think more about non-traditionally submitted outputs, so NTOs as we're calling them. I don't know, do you have any sort of thoughts in mind about where you would like to see not traditionally submitted outputs going, in relation to your work with the UKRN and also with the university?
Well, I think from our point of view, like I say, our focus at the moment is on open research. And then the question is, how can that then evolve into something that both supports the right kind of activities and better reflects what scholarship is like now compared to how it was when the concept of the journal was developed 400 years ago, for example. So I think one of the challenges that we face is not just that our quality control happens at the end of the process when we review a monograph or a journal or whatever it might be, but that actually we distill everything down into that compact nugget that we kind of lay down in the archaeological record of scholarship. That doesn't reflect the dynamic, evolving, team-based nature of knowledge generation that is the modern reality, if you like, whatever, again, discipline that you work within. And so I think better recognizing that kind of three-dimensional, evolving, dynamic nature of what we do is something that can be captured by these non-traditional outputs, can be captured by intermediate research outputs that you can then make available through open research practices. And I talked about data and code as examples of that. One of the projects that we're supporting through UKRN is Octopus, which was set up by Alexandra Freeman, now Baroness Freeman, who works with David Spiegelhalter in Cambridge and is a former journalist. And Octopus is a platform that is somewhere between a preprint server and a data repository. It disaggregates the journal article into constituent parts, the sort of research idea, the study plans, the data, the code, and so on. There are 8 of them, hence Octopus. And the idea is that you can come up with all of those different elements as a single research group if you want to, but you can come up with just some, and others can come up with other elements, and you create this web of knowledge, if you like, that I think is a much better way of reflecting what science and other disciplines actually does when it progresses. And that's an example, I think, of some of these different outputs that can then be generated and given a digital object identifier and be recognized and feature on people's CVs. And it allows for much more granular recognition of individual contributions from different academics, different researchers, but also technicians, other professionals, and so on. That feels like a much healthier approach to that better captures what we actually do than just writing a 3,000-word article that is constrained on the basis of paper being expensive 400 years ago.
That's a very good point. The availability of platforms like Octopus, and I should point out that Octopus is a supporter of the Hidden Ref as well, I think is a really useful way of helping people foreground the intermediate outputs, the other diversity of outputs that we are seeing in research. So I think we've got a platform in place that's really just trying to get research culture to catch up with the idea that people should be publishing this stuff. So on the subject of research culture, I have this question I really wanted to ask you about, because you're a person who's been working in that field of research culture and research policy change for quite a long time now. I just wondered sort of if you could talk about what you've learned about working in this field and to broaden it out to, is it a field you'd like to see more people joining and more people working in?
That's a really good question. I mean, first of all, one thing I've learned is that the word culture has become a bit unhelpful. Because it's a slightly vague word, people can interpret it in different ways, and you might argue that it's been weaponized in some quarters. to mean things that I don't think it was intended to mean, at least in the context of research culture, people, culture, and environment in the ref, and so on. I think it is about creating the conditions that allow people to thrive and flourish, do their best work, and as a result of that, generate high quality research. Like I said earlier, the environment within which research takes place, and by extension, the culture within which research takes place, is upstream of the research itself. It's going to have an effect on that research and on the quality of that research. And if we get that right, then what we do is going to be of higher quality, and we are going to be better at what we do and everything that flows from that. So I think it is really important. The idea that there should be people dedicated to that, I think there is a place for that. But ultimately, everything that we do and do to ourselves is done by us. In other words, there's no system out there that does things to us in academia. We are all part of academia. We are academia. We are the system, if you like. And so when people say, my grant was rejected by this particular funder, actually it was rejected by other academics sat around a table making decisions, who were embodying the values, if you like, the culture that led to those decisions. So we can collectively change things. We have that agency. I think we need to remember that. And to a large extent, these conversations around culture maybe need to be guided and shaped by people who've really kind of immersed themselves in that. But it's about all of us, and it's about all of us working collectively to try to create the working environments and conditions that we want, that we think are appropriate, that align with our individual values, our institutional values, our sectoral values, and so on, and that allow us to thrive.
So I think this is why grassroots campaigns are so powerful within the research field, because you're changing hearts and minds at all of these different levels. And as you say, it's not a system that's applied to us. We are the system itself. So if we can change it from within, we'll see the kind of change that we want happening. I think things like the Hidden Ref have obviously tapped into this, but UKRN has, I imagine you'd see that as partially a grassroots community as well. So is there ways we can bring more people into these sort of fields? And especially I'm interested in what happens with the next generation of people who are running these campaigns, trying to change research culture, research policy so that it reflects what's needed. What advice would you give to somebody who wanted to enter this field, especially if they're a sort of early career staff member?
Well, two things. I think grassroots energy can be really powerful and effective, but I think it's most effective when it's joined up with top-down support and advocacy. And that's where you need senior people to also be projecting the same message downwards, and the grassroots energy projecting that message upwards, and hopefully the two will meet in the middle. I think that's when you get really effective culture change or sectoral change. In terms of people wanting to join in with something that aligns with their personal interests and values, whether it be Hidden Ref, whether it be UKRN, I think one of the advantages now is that all of the social media tools and other tools that we have available makes it much easier for people to connect. I think in the past, people who were really interested in open research, for example, may have felt really isolated because there may only have been a handful of other people within their institution that they knew about, at least, who were interested in those things. It's much easier to create virtual communities now and then evolve those virtual communities into real life communities, if you like, on the ground. That's what UKRN has done through its communities of local networks. And that then creates the critical mass for you to both feel supported, because it can be quite lonely trying to change things if you feel like you're on your own, to share ideas, to share best practice and so on. But it can also give you the critical mass to actually have a loud voice within your institution or sectorally. And that's something that I think has changed in relatively recent history and has allowed for much more of this kind of grassroots energy to be channeled and to have an effect. So if you're a new person coming into one of these areas, it's almost like the structures are already in place, and that if you're interested in open research, reproducibility, research rigor, then UKRN exists and can put you in touch with either your existing local network or give you the resources to set up your own local network. Similarly, Hidden Ref, there are communities that you can be plugged into. You just need to reach out. And if there's something that we haven't thought of that the sector needs, that some early career researcher decides is going to be the next important thing in terms of improving the ways in which we work, then there are templates for how you do that and tools available to make it much easier. It takes energy, it takes effort, it takes time. That's one of the challenges, of course, but we can show that it's possible.
I have to add, I think it's hugely fun. It's a really interesting, rewarding part of the research environment to work in, this kind of trying to get this sort of change through. So I have a final question for you that I just wanted to add, because I was looking into your biography, trying to sort of understand what sort of questions we should be asking you. And I really do think I have to ask, what have you brought from coaching the women's rowing Olympic team into the academic environment? How do those worlds come together?
Well, it definitely wasn't the Olympic team. It was the under-23 team, although it was in the build-up to 2012, if anyone can remember that far back. And so lots of people that I was on the team with ended up racing in London, which was great to see. I think a lot of my thinking around creating the right conditions for success and an environment where people can thrive draw very heavily on that, because that is a nice example of a sector, if you want to call it that, where getting that right both benefits the individual and benefits the team itself. Because if you're working on a kind of 4-year Olympic cycle, if you burn out your athletes, they might get you a gold medal at the next games, but they're not going to hang around for another 4 years because it was a horrible experience. And so then you have to generate a whole new suite of athletes to go forward to the next games. Whereas if you can allow them to thrive and succeed in a way that means that they feel supported and that they don't burn out, and you keep them for another Olympiad, that both benefits them because they can spend longer doing the thing that they enjoy, they love, but it benefits you as the team principal or whatever it might be, and you keep that talent working within the system for longer, if you like. So, this is what I mean about the culture word being unhelpful sometimes, because it's not just about doing things for moral reasons, if you like. It's also about doing things actually for selfish reasons, in a sense, in that it's not zero sum. We can all benefit from this. If we create the right conditions that allow individuals to thrive, then we all benefit from that, individually and institutionally. And that's the kind of thinking that I think we need to bring to these conversations, and that I think I can trace back to those experiences. That we want to create that kind of high performance environment where people really excel, but enjoy that and thrive while they're doing that and feel like they're developing personally in ways that are meaningful to them.
Okay, so a big thank you to Marcus for being our first interviewee. What did you guys think about what he had to say?
Well, for me, I was really interested in about the purpose for the ref, and what Marcus said about the purpose of the ref being accountability and trust. And the reason for that is that I was at a dinner party last week. Yes, I have a life somewhere. And, I got the dreaded question for all academics, which is, so what is your research about? Oh. Yeah, collective groan. Right? And I said, well, I research and it's la, la, la. And I gave them the spiel. And I said, well, at the moment, I'm doing this podcast about some of my research and some of the work we're doing around the hidden ref. And it's called What the Ref. And they giggled about What the Ref because they got it. But then they went, what's the ref? And I went, it's the Research Excellence Framework. It's, it's periodic assessment that's been done and allocates the money associated to universities for research, And they were like, oh, okay, cool. And they said, so how do they allocate money? And I got into the criterion and I said, okay, well, there's 3 main criterion. There's, contribution to knowledge and understanding. And then there's people, culture, and environment. That's 25%. And then there's impact, which is how the research has had an impact beyond the science. And they're really excited about impact and engagement. They thought that was extremely important. And they thought, people, culture, and environment, that was really important too. And when it came down to contributions to knowledge and understanding, and yes, I did refer to it as outputs there, as we will in shorthand here, they were like, well, why do I care about that? And I got taken a bit back because, this is the main part of the ref. It's still 50% of the overall score. And yet the people who we are accountable as, recipients of public funding don't care about it. They were like, why do I care about contributions to knowledge and understanding? I care about, people, culture, and environment, and that universities are good working environments for researchers. And I care about impact and engagement because I want, the research to have, but I don't care about publications that are published that I can't or will not access either because I don't have a subscription or because they're written in a language that I don't understand. And the reason I found that really interesting is because we talked about on our previous podcast, we talked about the main problems associated with the people, culture, and environment statement. And there's a very noisy group within academia that says, it's an inaccurate measure of excellence, and it's such a large proportion of the overall budget. And yet the people who we are accountable for care about that so much more than outputs, which these groups are actually arguing should be higher. It should be higher associated with, to argue that a proportion of the ref should be higher whilst also claiming accountability to the public, which don't care about that proportion, is a tension that I'm finding very, as you can see, difficult to resonate, but it's actually very interesting when we talk about what the ref tries to do. And it really resonated with what Marcus was talking about trust in the research, trust in our universities, providers and producers of research, so that we can attract industry, they contribution to knowledge understanding, 50% outputs, journal articles, even non-traditional submitted outputs, not on the radar of those who we are accountable to.
We should probably add a disclaimer here that we're not claiming that Gemma's dinner party was representative of all of society and what they might think about the ref. But, it is still interesting because like one of the things Marcus mentioned, for example, was about like his critique of the article and the book as this like nugget that's a proxy for all sorts of things around research quality. And I guess traditionally has been seen as a nugget that's seen to be fitting in with the impact, for example, of the research or the kind of wider culture it creates. And like his critique of that is very much a subtle argument in my mind for PC and why PC is there. So yeah, your dinner party makes sense as a kind of as a way into thinking about that discussion.
Yeah, and I got very defensive, and this was after about 3 gin and tonics. So I got very animated about the research excellence framework, which I normally do, and how to define and measure excellence and how it's done through the ref, etc. But they do have a point there. And they do have a point, is that those who we are accountable, the PCE, is a very, very vital, important part. And for the future of the universities, which Marcus actually said in his interview, is that if we can show that the environment is trustworthy, if we can show that the environment is worth investing in, then when we will encourage investment in research at universities, which is something that universities right now need more than ever, because we're talking about very, very challenging financial times ahead.
So this is this plays into the thing that I took from the talk, and it was running through my head when I was doing the interview. But before I get into that, I have to say that I really want to comment on your level of confidence at dinner parties, Gemma. You go on about the ref at length. I mean, I spend my entire time when they ask me that question about what you do, trying to close that conversation down. Let's not get into it. It's just going to be a very confusing talk for us all.
I can't confirm that anyone was listening, but everybody was very polite at this dinner party.
So the thing for me is about the way. So you take this idea, this concept of what we're trying to assess in research, you take it to lay people, and you ask, what do you think is important, and they don't really get the understanding of that focus on outputs, and then that plays into like the whole discussion around incentives, and ultimately that's what the ref's about. So. The ref is putting up an incentive system to try and drive research culture in a particular way. And then our hope with the hidden ref is if we can affect the ref in a particular way, we can change that research culture and we can change the local policies in universities so people start to care about all of the outputs that are involved in research and importantly, all of those roles that are absolutely vital to research. And it really just got me thinking about the way that we put this incentive structure into place. And your point of the lay people saying that they kind of don't understand the focus on outputs. That's where the majority of the incentives lie. When you put together your promotion package or you're trying to show, in a bid how important the work that you've done so far is, you focus almost entirely on outputs and very little actually on that broader sort of impact and environment and statement that we care about more.
Can we defend outputs for a minute?
Yeah, go on, James.
I mean, ultimately, like
we all produce them, though. We're all guilty. We're all complicit in this reward framework. But yeah,
I mean, I think it's important to note, of course, that the purpose of the university ultimately is to produce knowledge and to foster knowledge, and so outputs are an input in whatever form they might be, though they do tend to be seen in the traditional form. Outputs are meant to be a way of understanding the quality of the knowledge that an individual group of individuals has produced, right? And it's a proxy for that. So there is a kind of, I think to go down the route of, say, if we polled all the public and the public came back and said the only thing that's important is impact, well, eventually you're never going to get any useful impact because there won't be good knowledge underpinning it. So we have to have the knowledge, and the knowledge probably should be the 50% or 50% plus one of what the ref is assessed with, in order for that kind of conception of the university to make sense, unless, of course, at a kind of wider political level, we change the conception of the university. The issue really is that the types of publications that tend to be the proxies for quality are proving problematic, as we're saying through the hidden ref, of actually necessarily ensuring that, the best possible research is being produced, or the best possible time is being used to produce research, because the focus has been on the publication at the end of it, right?
And I think it's really important if they're to say a lot of the publications, that the majority of publications that, or the majority of outputs that are submitted to the contribution to knowledge and understanding, are inaccessible to the lay public. So it's not that they don't think it's important, but there's a matter of, well, they don't know how important it is for us to do our work as we go forward. And non-traditionally submitted outputs, especially software, websites, exhibitions, performance, are more publicly accessible. So I can understand that outputs are really important, but also our dissemination strategies are very important. And public might, if we saw that these types of ways in which you can, talk about your research and communicate your research are valued, then that would perhaps make these people who are so skeptical about, publications and journals only far more, I can see the value in that output rather than another type of output. So I get that it's a very nuanced argument, but non-traditionally submitted outputs are predominantly far more accessible to the public to actually understand, experience research, and to perhaps absorb it either explicitly or implicitly.
So I think, basically what we're doing here is we're experiencing all of the tensions and balances that the ref team have to deal with on a daily basis. So I'll do my standard thing of I'm very happy that we're running the hidden ref and not the ref. I think your check there, James, actually was a really, really useful one. I think because we spend so much time trying to raise awareness of the not traditionally submitted outputs, then sometimes you get into a bit of a roll on things and you overlook at the actually, journal publications and books and all those sort of traditionally submitted outputs, they're a key part of our contract with the taxpayer. So the taxpayer gives us the money to do the research, and we generate the knowledge and supposedly share it openly, back to everybody. So I think it is key that we remember that. It's just sometimes it's quite hard when we talk about outputs in this entirely broad spectrum, diverse way, and then we find out that actually the only ones that people are submitting are the journal publications and books and such like. But we should definitely remember that traditional outputs are just as important.
So thanks to Marcus, Simon, and Gemma. That was great. Please do send us your ideas for other people to interview at wtref@hidden-ref.org. Don't forget about the Hidden Ref Festival coming up from the 7th and 8th of October. Please sign up to come and join us in Birmingham. And look out for us on all your usual podcast channels, on YouTube, and coming soon as well. You might get a sneak preview if you look right now, YouTube Shorts as well. So we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye.